Hey guys, it's Gage down here at the Fleet Gym, PSP Halifax. Beautiful sunny morning here. It's Friday for me. You guys are going to be seeing this later on, so I've definitely got that Friday feeling. I'm happy to be bringing you guys some knowledge today. Before we get into the fun stuff, the kind of meat and potatoes of the workshop, I do have a quick disclaimer I need to read for you guys. If you've been following along at home, you've seen some of the workouts, you've seen some of the workshops, you'll be familiar with this disclaimer. So it'll be in every video. So just remember that in response to COVID-19, PSP is offering virtual fitness to Canadian Armed Forces members. By using social media platforms, the virtual fitness class is tailored to CAF personnel and become accessible to all. Participants who are not Canadian Forces members recognize and acknowledge that their age, health status, and physical fitness level are unknown, and it is entirely up to each individual to assess their ability to participate in this class. Since it is preferable to consult your physician before beginning any exercise program, we invite all participants who are not CAF members to consult the Get Active questionnaire from the Canadian Society of Exercise Physiology and its reference documents. If you experience any pain or difficulty during the exercises presented in this video, it is recommended that you stop and consult a healthcare provider. If CAF members sustain an injury during this video, please remember to fill out a CF98. So with that administrative business out of the way, guys, no one will really be sustaining any injuries during this video. This is a theoretical lesson, a programming workshop for you guys who are training on your own at home. So a lot of these workshops are kind of geared towards developing physical skills for you guys. And this one is geared a little bit more towards developing your programming knowledge. So if you're training on your own, helping you design your own training programs. I love this approach. I like teaching physical skills. I'm really passionate about that, but I think teaching mental skills so people kind of develop their own agency in training themselves is really important. It's a bit of a teach a man to fish or teach a CAF member to fish versus giving them a fish for the one day. So hopefully it's not too dull for you guys to be, just hearing me read off the disclaimer, because I do have some notes for myself here that I'm going to reference a little bit as we go. So as you guys are going to see in the title of the video, what I want to talk about today is training for conflicting or divergent fitness pursuits. Training for competing interests, you might say. It's nothing new, though it has grown dramatically in popularity over the last decade or so. Traditionally, and sometimes still today, specificity kind of reigns supreme when it comes to program design. So runners run, throwers throw, hurdlers hurdle, swimmers swim, that kind of thing, right? Bodybuilders bodybuild, weightlifters weightlift, throwers throw, tennis players play tennis. It's not uncommon now to encounter people with fitness pursuits that are still kind of directed specifically towards those things, right? Like I'm sure we all know lots of folks who are really die-hard, straight and narrow into strength sports or bodybuilding, or kind of on the complete other side of the spectrum, really die-hard into endurance sports, endurance racing, running, swimming, cycling, triathlon, right? And really effective strength and conditioning systems of decision making would incorporate elements of those divergent pursuits for this specific athlete, but only insofar as they benefit the primary activity, right? So the clearest example of this would be like a long distance, or probably more likely like a middle distance runner, maybe someone who runs the 800, the mile, or the 5K. They would be likely to incorporate enough strength training in the program to remain like robust and injury-free, but without taking away from their running volume, causing unnecessary training stress, depleting recovery resources, or developing a bit of a suboptimal body composition where they might become a little too muscular or a little too heavy, etc. So this is all well and good. It's not really the focus of what I want to talk about today. So generally, when we kind of talk about folks who are training for divergent pursuits, there's a few categories that they kind of fall into. So we have field athletes, so people in sports like rugby, American football, soccer to a lesser extent, tactical professionals, that's obviously extremely relevant to us here at CFNWS, PSP, and in the Canadian Armed Forces, law enforcement, other types of first responders, and just like recreational trainees who, a lot of people in this center of the Venn diagram, kind of between the strength athletes and the endurance athletes, the people in the center. That's kind of who we're talking about today. So there's a lot of people in that center who would have very valid reasons for wanting to pursue fairly high levels of performance in both strength-related capacities and conditioning-related capacities. So those are kind of the two divergent things we're talking about here today. Training these polarities and building a well-rounded fitness is always something I've been really passionate about. Tactical professionals are probably the category that's most important to do this in. Life can be on the line for these guys, same with the first responders, so fitness means a little bit more in that setting, right? It's not a recreational pursuit, it's not a hobby. Tactical professionals and law enforcement and other first responders are probably the population that responds best to this approach. We see this reflected pretty clearly in the force test, right? As well as, kind of the demands of some of our more physically demanding occupations here in the CAF. Being a bit of a Swiss Army knife of fitness can yield a lot of positive outcomes for you, rather than sort of being boxed into just being an endurance person or just being a strength or hypertrophy person. Generally, for tactical professionals and law enforcement, I'd like to see them shoot straight down the middle and develop both pretty evenly. That's complicated though, right? Training for diverse avenues of fitness is no small task. Most people in the gym will never achieve a 315-pound bench press or a sub 20-minute 5K, let alone combining those two, which would be a pretty good indicator that this is a well-rounded person, right? This is it's an example. It is a bit of a realistic example for sure. In this workshop, I do want to examine some of the considerations when it comes to training those polarities, some of the misconceptions we might have when it comes to training for divergent fitness goals, like the example above with the bench press and the 5K. We're going to come back to that one a few times. We're going to use this hypothetical guy who's trying to achieve a 315 bench and a sub 20-minute 5K. He's going to be our avatar for the day. And we're going to kind of extrapolate that to just general people with more general specific goals that don't fall strictly in line with purely aesthetics or strength or bodybuilding or powerlifting or weightlifting, and then kind of on the other side, the purely endurance folks. So whether you're training for high level of performance across a spectrum of modalities, like you might be if you were a law enforcement professional or a tactical professional, or fitness qualities, or just like kind of looking to maintain a fairly consistent level across the board to improve your health, longevity, vitality, wellness overall, balancing your efforts is essential here. And that's one of the main things I want to talk about today. So balance in training and in program design is a pretty key concept. But what I mean when I say balance in program design doesn't necessarily seem to be kind of what gets, something's a little lost in translation there, and that's what I want to talk about today. I think it's pretty misunderstood. So I'm going to give you guys a bit of a demonstration here. So when most folks talk about the idea of balanced training, often kind of what they imagine in their head, we're going to do two different pie charts here, okay? So what they imagine initially is something that looks kind of like this. Bear with me for a minute. Okay, so this is all of their training as a whole. And let's say it's got 4 quadrants, okay? So we're going to call this program A. So this is going to be program A. And you guessed it, we're going to have program B over here. Okay. So program A, you guys can see here, program A, this athlete is training 25% of their sessions or their efforts or their volume, however you want to think of it. The purple, this is going to be their strength work. Okay. Now let's say the pink, I want to call it, I guess. This is kind of a pink color. The pink over here, so we're going to fill in this corridor. This is their conditioning work. So that's all of our cardio. Could be steady state, could be intervals, could be lactate threshold, could be some kind of occupational specific task like running or rucking or finned swimming maybe if you're a diver. So now the blue's a kind of a nice cool color. We're going to make that their mobility and recovery efforts. So that could be stretching, foam rolling, sauna, massage. Let's just put it in as mobility. We'll put it in as recovery actually. And then the last one, let's say what else could they be training? Maybe they read online or they heard from a friend that they should be training balance and agility or something. So we'll put that in as green. Okay. Balance and agility. So maybe they're running some agility ladders, they're standing on one foot, whatever. So this is a pretty understandable perception that you would maybe have of balanced training, right? Each demand in this program is given equal footing, each one's given equal billing. They each get 1/4 of this person's time or efforts. So how is this not balanced, right? It's pretty obvious, everything's even. I'm gonna propose an alternate example instead on the other side here. Okay, so let's take a look at program B. So we took a look at our program A, so this guy is kind of training at, let's call each of these as 1 day. Maybe he's giving 1 day each up to his strength work, his conditioning work, his recovery, his balance and agility. So we're gonna come over to program B on the other side. And I'm gonna make that circle a little bigger, just so it's a little more visible for you guys back there. Okay, so B. Now let's say this guy, he is doing about 65%. We're gonna stick with the same colors. So this is his strength work. We're gonna give him, I don't know, I didn't draw this very well. We're gonna give him maybe another 25–30% will be his conditioning work. And then he's gonna keep some recovery work in too. So we're gonna give him a little slice of the pie up here, recovery. And that stuff is not very taxing for us, but it does take time, so we kind of have to factor it into our program design if we're gonna be doing massage, sauna, stretching, foam rolling, whatever. So, as you guys can see, training is a finite resource. So anyone who's pursued a relatively difficult goal will tell you this. You can't train infinitely. Each person is going to have a maximum amount of recoverable volume, recoverable intensity, and that'll kind of be dictated by many factors, right? So could be dictated by age, size, gender, training history, training age, diet, sleep quality, sleep quantity, etc. There's tons of factors that could influence this for us. So while the number of the first approach here of balancing everything might initially sort of seem to make sense, this quickly falls apart for several reasons, okay? And this is what I want to talk to you guys about in terms of balancing your efforts to achieve divergent goals today. So clearly we cannot keep training, we can't just keep adding things in indefinitely, right? So someone trying to improve their strength on a 4-day-a-week plan, like maybe this guy right here, maybe this is a 4-day-a-week slice right here, he can't give up 4 equally difficult conditioning efforts because he's already taken up so much of his pie, right? So he's going to find it difficult or impossible to add in 4 difficult conditioning sessions on top of that. So even if you could physically handle it, the realities of scheduling that many sessions into the actual everyday life of a real person with a job and maybe a family and other demands is unrealistic, right? So let's say we take this, we go back to this guy. Let's say we take this approach again, okay? Now let's say if we think of balanced training this way, if he's doing 4 days to try and push his strength, that means this also needs to become a 4, this needs to become a 4, and this needs to become a 4, and that's just not realistic. So rather than balance, I think it's important to think of it as proportional balance, not balance in terms of direct equality across all of your training and all of the qualities that you train. I like to think of it as if we're making a meal that has many different ingredients, okay? So maybe something like a soup or a stew. If we were to include the same amount of each ingredient, weird example, bear with me. So let's say we include 1 pound of meat, 1 pound of vegetables, 1 pound of salt, 1 pound of butter, and 1 pound of broth. Your stew is going to be completely inedible. It's going to be hardly recognizable. It's not going to be a stew that you would want to eat. It's not going to be a stew that you would feed anyone else. Training kind of works the same way. You need to combine the constituent ingredients into something that adds up to a whole, not something that adds up to just everything in random quantities, which, although this looks standardized on the surface, it's not. It's sort of like the stew, right? 1 pound of meat, 1 pound of vegetables, 1 pound of salt, 1 pound of butter. Versus in this example, this would be, an appropriate amount of meat, vegetables, butter. I'm not a great cook, so this analogy falls apart a little bit when I try to explain it beyond that. But it should be a pretty easy concept to grasp for you guys. Balance refers to keeping things proportional rather than keeping things completely equal. Frankly, folks who are taking this first approach to training are probably not training any of these individual qualities enough to make meaningful progress in their fitness. And if they are trying to do 4, and then their idea of balancing that out is by doing an equal amount of the other things, that's going to fall apart really fast, right? We need to prioritize things in a proportional and balanced way when we train. On the other hand, the program B, so the guy in this example here, he's doing enough strength work to make meaningful progress and has peeled back his other efforts to allow his strength to continue to progress without hindering his recovery or putting a big dampen on the conditioning that he already has. He's doing enough to maintain that and hold on to that, right? You only have so much pie chart to work with, right? So if this guy wanted to do all that much more work, well, if he had a bigger pie, he maybe could do it. Let's say this is 1 session, for example, and then 2 is out here, and then 3 is out here, and he would be able to get to 4. But now you're talking about a pie that is much bigger in circumference, which would kind of represent having higher maximal recoverable volume and intensity. So while it's not impossible to get a bigger pie, it's very hard. We'd be talking about almost like de-aging ourselves, sleeping a lot more, eating a big caloric surplus. It's not realistic for a lot of people to really increase the pie by that much, especially if you're already quite fit, very strong, for example. Then the recovery resources it's going to take you to do this won't even leave you a lot of room to grow the pie a lot bigger. Which kind of leads me to what I sort of think of as the golden rule in programming, okay? And this is the biggest thing I want to talk about today. When you add something in, something else must come out. The pie is only so big. So if you're planning to add in more strength work, it's got to come from somewhere, right? So it's going to come out of these resources. You just can't keep adding things on infinitely. Your pie needs to look more like this than like this, especially if you're trying to pursue broad fitness or divergent goals, polarized goals, right? You have to be prepared to peel back the amount of hard squatting, for example, that you're going to be doing if you're pushing your run, right? Like if you're pushing your running volume and intensity, something else has got to come out. If this were flipped, this were the conditioning pie over here, he's gonna maybe need a little bit more recovery too. So both conditioning and recovery are gonna be eating into the strength side for this guy. If you're maybe, another example would be if you're preparing for a selection course that requires a lot of swimming, and you're not a great swimmer now, so maybe you're a aspiring combat diver or ship's team diver, your swim time is going to eat into everything else because it's both a skill task, something you need to learn, and it's a training demand on your, physiologically, right? So let's take this, let's say this guy needs to learn to swim. We're going to represent his swimming with the green. So now we need to add in another pie, right? We need to add in a whole other piece, and that's probably going to take away a lot of strength work. It's going to come from up here, right? Because it's going to eat into the amount of time he has for recovery. It's a bit of a conditioning demand, so it's not going to eat into that very much, but it's going to start to take up a lot of the overall piece if he needs to both learn it and progress it as a training tool. So this is where the pie chart analogy I find really starts to click for people. We only have so much pie to work with. You can get a bigger pie. In theory, in practice, maybe not. Let's go back to the example of our trainee who is aiming to concurrently bench 315 pounds and run a sub 20-minute 5K. Pretty easily illustratable examples for you guys. In most cases, the best course of action for this trainee is going to be to prioritize one and then the other. So gain a surplus in one area. Maybe we think about when this was a big strength slice. Gain a big surplus in the strength, do enough conditioning to maintain it. And then prioritize the other while maintaining the first quality. So in practice, this trainee would maybe be well served by doing a block with 3 to 4 strength sessions a week. It could be like a full body format or an upper-lower format, maybe with 2 uppers and 1 lower, since in the example he's prioritizing the bench. And he would be doing 2 low-intensity steady-state cardio days on top of that to maintain aerobic capacity while he's driving up the strength numbers. Once this trainee had achieved maybe a 330-pound bench, they could pivot the program design and then utilize maybe 2 full body strength sessions and 3 to 4 hard running specific sessions that would get them to their 5K goal. Those 3 to 4 sessions could be a long run progressing in distance, tempo run in the 3.5 to 5K range, and maybe a lactate threshold interval. And they could alternate the tempo run with something a little easier, like a additional steady state run at half the distance of their long run if they were really fatigued that week. So with this in place, I'm going to give you guys a bit of a practical overview of some examples that I like to use for different situations. The actual black and white of these sessions would entail what they would look like over weeks and even months, would be largely individualized, but there are some kind of big picture things that I like to think of these as starting points for a lot of programs that I write for people in these situations. So a bird's eye view of an effective approach could look like any of the following, and I've got a short list that I want to go through for you guys. So it could be 3 days of hard full body strength work with 1 or 2 days of easy aerobic work. That would obviously be someone who are really prioritizing their strength and just holding on to enough endurance work. 2 days of minimalist full body strength work with 3 to 4 hard days of conditioning. That one requires some tricky scheduling, but it's really effective. It could be 4 days of lifting in an upper-lower format with 1 to 2 days of conditioning, like an easy day and a hard day, or a high-low approach, which we'll talk about too. It could be 2 upper days, 1 lower day, and 3-ish hard conditioning sessions. Again, that's a hard one to schedule. You really need to plan your running around when your lower body day is. But if you have a lot of free time, it can work really well. And then a minimalist approach could be 2 full body strength sessions and 1 or 2 conditioning sessions specific to what you're looking to improve. That could be really good for someone short on time. One or those 2 strength and 1 conditioning can get you pretty fit, take you a long way. So to refer to our pie chart and our proportional balancing golden rule, what you need is more of one thing and less of something else. with the right guidance or a bit of a keen programming mind of your own, taking this approach can get you a long-term fitness in many areas and leave you with a, really generally well-rounded physical body of experience. You'll be fitter than almost anyone. So at this point, you're probably thinking, okay, this is all well and good. I get what Gage is saying. I need to take an approach that prioritizes some things over others and kind of fluctuate that over time and time again to get the results that I want. It's a bit of a bird's eye view. The individual sessions would vary based on my ability, my training history, my max recoverable volume. How often should I train, right? This is one of the questions I get most often. How many days a week should I work out is usually the way that it's phrased. This is a tricky question to answer without knowing anything about you. So instead I'm going to try to ask you, the viewer, a few questions and guide you through this yourself. So basically what you need to identify, especially if you're going to be in this situation of training broad fitness or divergent fitness qualities, where the scheduling of these things does become tricky, right? It's not like endurance training where, not that every day is the same, but they don't interfere with each other as much, right? These demands can interfere with each other. The scheduling is hard, so how many days do you train around that? It's a hard question to answer. The three things I want you to ask yourself is how much you are willing to commit to training emotionally, physically, and socially. So let's break each of these down and I'll kind of describe what I mean for each one. So when it comes to emotionally, everyone has great intentions when they first start their training program. Every time I chat with someone, they tell me they want to work out 14 times a week or whatever, but that usually quickly kind of falls apart. Reality sets in, the trainee realizes that he or she may only be motivated to train like 3 or 4 times a week. You kind of have to be realistic with yourself and decide how many days am I really willing to go into my sessions and burn it down and give it the effort that it requires to make meaningful progress. Physically, this one's pretty cut and dry, right? But it's far too common for me to not take a minute out of the workshop to discuss it. So how much training can your body realistically handle and recover from and still make measurable progress? Lots of people beat themselves into the ground every day in the gym, day in and day out, year after year, and still manage to make no progress. This is not a situation you want to be in. You want to actually get some return on the sweat equity that you're putting into your training, right? Why would you just want to grind away forever and not make any progress? Or often these people regress, right? They get worse as they go. So don't fall into this trap. It's one of the biggest pitfalls, especially if you're trying to train kind of concurrent disciplines here. Be smart and realize that the amount of training you can physically do is not the same as how much productive training you can do. So once again, lots of people can show up to the gym every day and go through the motions and not really produce much of a result for themselves out of it, right? The whole thing here is, the whole purpose is to actually get better, not just punch the clock for as many workouts as possible. So with that said, use some common sense with this. Think about the golden rule. Something goes in, something has to come out. So you can't just constantly be adding things in and in and in, because you have finite training resources, right? It's only one pie. You don't get a bigger pie. Socially is probably the most common barrier. This is, virtually everyone has some form of social limitation that competes for their time and attention, and sometimes their emotional attention, etc. That's nothing to be ashamed of, right? Most people watching this have other hobbies, friends, family, and frankly, your friends and family probably don't care that. Like, let's take the bench press 5K guy example. Your family's not going to love you any less if you don't make your goals of benching 315ing and running a sub 20-minute 5K. You care about that a lot, and in some situations it might be career relevant for you, but the people around you don't really care about that. So it's going to be hard for them to understand. They probably don't care if you make your sessions or you make your 10K goal or whatever. This is okay as long as you're realistic about the amount that you're willing to train and able to train. Trying to train like an Olympic decathlete when you're working full-time and raising a family that's just so unlikely that it comes off as science fiction to me. So find a balance and a proportion that actually fits your life and the resources that you have available, physically, socially, and emotionally, so that you can actually adhere to your program, right? If this stuff is great, like programs are great, but if they don't fit your life, then you're kind of just going to be like detracting from your life to make your program work. And you definitely should not be like eating into quality time with your family or sleep, especially to accomplish your program, right? Once again, like the point is to actually make progress. If you're kind of taking time away from sleep and other things that would help you make progress, you're missing the point. You're kind of missing the forest for the trees on that one. So in terms of scheduling, there's a few ways we can go about it. I gave you guys a bit of a quick breakdown. Some of that may have seemed a little unreasonable to you if you're only used to being in the gym once or twice a week. If you are struggling to schedule your efforts and recover from them, I would really recommend the work of Joel Jamieson to check some of that stuff out, especially the high-low approach, where you would kind of cluster your more stressful sessions together and balance them out with your least stressful sessions. So that could even look like doing your harder conditioning work the same day as your harder strength work, if your schedule permits, and the next day doing a very easy conditioning session. So you would get a bit of a polarity high-low approach to your training. So scheduling wise, it is difficult, but if you can make it work, it'll probably physiologically yield you some gains. So those are some of the tools I wanted to give you guys today in terms of program design. There are a few questions you need to ask yourself, like we talked about, how much can you train emotionally, physically, socially? So just in conclusion, I would kind of like to encourage you guys to start by setting some realistic goals for yourselves. So let's take a look back at our aspiring he wants to bench 315 and run a sub 20 minute mile or sub 20 minute 5K, sub 20 minute mile. You know, if this guy has a current bench PR of 385, but his 5K is only 36 and a half minutes, his training would look a lot different than if his PRs were 175 in the bench and 36 and a half minutes in the 5K, right? So be honest with where you're at and realistic with where you want to go. Balance out your efforts appropriately. You know, think about the golden rule, right? Something comes in, something comes out. Remember that training is a finite resource. We can't constantly be going to the well and like burning ourselves down on these harder and harder efforts without balancing that in some way. Ask yourself how much you're willing to train emotionally, physically, and socially. Put these things together into an intelligent program design that makes sense for you. Make a plan, action your plan, and reap the